Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Jordan Bateman here, the Director of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. And unbelievably, I have survived to the third straight week of the BC Poly Hot Stove. Maclean K, Editor-in-Chief of the Orca, still can't find anyone better to host with them.
The search goes on. We should have my email pop up on a crawl on the screen here. Please apply.
Send your resumes to Maclean K, care of the BC Legislature. Maclean, I am so grateful, though, that you are alive. I understand there was a fake earthquake in Victoria. I was worried you would be fake injured and possibly fake killed, but I see you look fine.
I am fake okay. Yeah, I've had many a shakeout drill here in the legislature. This is the first time I've ever had to do one from the top floor as opposed to the basement and certain quick death. So it's a very different perspective. They do it every year. It's basically amounts to a half hour off of work.
I hate to break it to you, but I think anywhere you are in the ledge, you're likely to die.
No, hush now. My mother might be watching. I'm completely safe where I am.
Yes, we had the drill here as well. I was smart, though. I pressed the little button on my desk that lifts it up, so it got nice and high, so I didn't have to get all crouched and wrench my back trying to get underneath the table.
I actually went all the way under me. In fact, there's photo evidence of me looking suitably alarmed underneath my desk.
Yes, well, with a cheeky tweet that was quite cheeky.
Cheeky? No, I was promised that proportional representation we would not have earthquakes, and those earthquakes we do have, half of them will be either women or visible minorities.
Exactly. Great point. Okay, so Maclean, in fact, we're putting those people in danger. We should be ashamed of ourselves by saying them to the legislature. Now, Maclean, I have to say that I was watching a little bit of Question Period the other day, and I could have swore I heard the Liberals heckling something about a cabinet shuffle. Was I just dreaming that?
You were not. It happened. It's not the first time they've heckled it. The target is Transportation Minister Claire Trevena, who has been dancing around the issue of community benefit agreements, but more specifically within community benefit agreements, that point that even the NDP don't want to talk about too often, which is that, I don't need to explain it to you, but for the benefit of our listeners, if you want to work on a provincial infrastructure project, you must join, not only must you join a union, you must join a union that the NDP government has approved. This was not mentioned in the original release. It took some ferreting out by a reporter, the Vancouver Sun's Rob Shaw, and ever since then, the Liberals have zeroed in like a shark after blood.
Yeah, well, this, flies in the face. This is one of the reasons why the Liberals got elected in 2001, was to get rid of these kind of unfair, outdated, expensive procurement practices. And, there's lots of criticism about the Liberals and how they've purchased services over the past 16 years, but nothing like this where there's a direct monopoly to direct donors to a party. So I think it's a pretty rich vein for the BC Liberal Party to mine, especially in Question Period, where so many other questions get thrown back onto their record rather than focusing attention on the NDP's decisions.
Well, that's what the NDP and Minister Trevena try to do on this issue. But to me, what's oddest about this issue is not necessarily that the NDP are doing it. It's that they're doing it and they act sort of somewhat quiet and reserved and ashamed about it. They don't. If you're going to do it, just say yes, we're doing it, and we think it's better for reasons X, Y, and Z. And those reasons might be completely ridiculous, but at least you're standing behind it. But instead, it's this whole anyone can apply, which is like saying I can apply to be eligible for the NBA draft. Good for you. It's still not going to happen. So it's this weird sort of, they're doing it, and yet they sort of quietly hope that nobody notices.
Yeah, no, they should be ashamed of themselves, and it's not popular, as a piece on the Orca a couple of weeks pointed out. All right, Maclean, what is on the front burner? What is the political issue British Columbia should be thinking about this week?
Well, it's the speculation tax. Yeah. It's been a busy week for the speculation tax. 2 days ago, Carol James introduced the bill into the legislature. It is 104 pages long, and I only know that because 48 hours later, that bill is now out of date, because not 2 hours ago, Carol James stood side by side with Andrew Weaver, who has, they've reached an agreement, they say, on 3 amendments to the bill, which Mr. Weaver will introduce. He outlined them briefly in his press conference today, and there are 2 that are interesting. One is that previously they were asking Canadians, which is to say Canadians who don't live in British Columbia, to pay a higher rate. Now they're paying the same rate as British Columbians at 0.5%. But more to the point, Mr. Weaver, to his credit, had said that he favored a municipality opt-out clause, meaning that if the municipal government didn't want to be part of this, they should be able to just opt out. That did not happen. What those mayors instead are getting is, wait for this, an annual meeting with the finance minister and or her staff to plead their case, which apparently they hadn't had the opportunity to do beforehand. And in fact, when asked what would change your mind, Minister Carol James just sort of said, well, when the problem is solved. So in other words, they're getting nothing but more wasting of their time.
Oh my gosh. Yes, there's nothing like a meeting to solve that.
Well, and they've had meetings, is the thing.
Yeah.
As Carol James had said over and over again in the House, she said at UBCM she met with a lot of these mayors, and good, but they didn't change her mind then. Why would anyone think that they're going to do anything other than talk at each other or talk past each other when they meet next year?
This Andrew Weaver, like he was, all huffing and puffing about how this Spec tax was terrible, how he was going to fight it tooth and nail, and now he's just kind of caved in yet again to the NDP. Correct?
Well, yeah, he didn't seem to get anything of consequence other than having the tax assessed on Canadians outside of BC, which does two things. It doesn't really materially affect British Columbians who are paying the tax and upset about it, or the mayors and the solutions there. But it also will force a further revision of the NDP's budget estimate for the tax, which, they first talked about a year ago, finally introduced 48 hours ago, and still we don't really know how much money it's going to bring in because it keeps changing. So, it's to say that this issue has not been well handled would be a serious understatement.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. I do wonder what some of these mayors are thinking today. These Stu Youngs, the Doug Finlighters, West Kelowna, they just must be fit to be tied with this. And Andrew Weaver, to them, was painting himself as a champion, and he's proved to have folded this tent very quickly. Broader question here. Andrew Weaver as a politician, I think it's fair to say, has not performed great in this role of power broker. He seems to, the Green Party seems to have squandered their entire agenda, despite holding the balance of power in the BC legislature. What if Maclean, David Eby was the leader of the BC Green Party and had 3 seats and held the balance of power? How different would a more seasoned political operative, how much more could a real pro have extracted than Andrew Weaver has?
Well, the speculation tax is a great example, and because it's something that Weaver had said that under no circumstances would he support, and now he is. The thing is, it's not a confidence vote. If he wanted to vote against it, he could. The government would not fall. So, it is not too simplistic to suggest that he could just say no. Yeah. This is not like the budget, where the consequences of voting no are much greater, and so there's an argument to be made that he doesn't want to do that. Someone like David Eby, whether you like him or dislike him, he's the negative way to put it would be ruthless. The positive way to put it would be he gets things done. I can't imagine a universe in which David Eby holding the balance of power would be anything other than, let's use the word efficient.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be David Eby. You could, on the other side, you could have Mike DeYoung holding the balance of power, right? Yeah. Like a guy like that, someone who knows the way procedures work. This thing could have been voted against. They would not have violated CASA. God forbid they violate CASA.
There's a point to be made about CASA as well, which I wanted to come to later in our talk, but I think it's worth bringing it up now. The entire reason that this wing of government exists is to, quote, include the Greens in the decision-making process. I was told privately in a piece I'm working on for the Orca right now that Jeff Meggs, the NDP Chief of Staff, and Evan Pivnik, the Greens Chief of Staff, meet weekly, and that a lot of discussion goes on between CASA and the Premier's office and Andrew Weaver's office, and that, more to the point, a lot of bad legislation, they implied, had been nipped in the bud. And if that's true, great. However, this organization exists, the Secretariat exists, I should say, so that things like today don't happen, where the NDP introduces legislation and then 48 hours later, it's out of date. So something has gone amiss. I don't know what it is, but this secretariat, which, again, the entire reason for its existence, well, it blew up in their face today. It's disappointing.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. I mean, this thing's been in the works for months. Weaver's made his concerns known. Surely they've talked about behind the scenes. Like, bizarre that, well, I don't know if James just got him to cave in, and so she was more than happy to take it out, go to the bank now, or just this is a weird one, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people like you and Vaughn and Mike Smith and Les Lane kind of try to dig in to get to the bottom of it.
Weaver hinted that he and James have been meeting on this for some time, and it was actually Carol James who said that the Third Amendment, which is the reducing the tax in half for Canadians outside of BC, she absolutely did not want to do. So, I mean, I guess you could give Andrew Weaver some credit for that. But the point is that this has apparently been on the agenda for some time behind the scenes, and yet they still introduced the legislation as it was 48 hours ago.
Yeah, crazy. All right, yes. So the speculation tax, definitely hot. My hot burner issue, of course, is the municipal election. One last time. Saturday is voting day. First, for those candidates, first the swearing in, then the swearing at will happen. Here we go. We are now, 48 hours away from election day, and there's a lot of races still up in the air.
Yeah, there are. And if you read Jody Vance's piece in yesterday's Orca, the ballot keeps getting more complicated, but please get out and vote. And if you need to do your homework beforehand, please do your homework beforehand. It's honestly, for the most part, if you're even halfway engaged, it's not going to take you more than, what would you say, half an hour of some dedicated Googling to figure out which candidates or mayoral candidate or council candidates roughly align with your personal priorities and the things you want to see get done in your communities, and vice versa as well, those that you don't want to see anywhere near the reins of power. So, at the risk of sounding like a public service announcement, please do that. Please go out and vote. Municipal turnouts are always just way too low, and it's usually the issues that affect you most on a day-to-day basis. It's one of those weird truisms of Canadian politics that that level of politics that you see most and affects your day-to-day life more than any other sees the least engagement, and it's not close.
Yeah, this is an interesting election day because there have been far fewer polls out in all these different cities. Candidates don't have the kind of money to do voter ID that they used to do. So there's a lot of high-profile campaigns flying blind. It'll be interesting to see whose perceptions of the electorate turn out to be right and who's managed to connect in a way to actually get people to the polls. But my bet is municipal election turnout all-time low coming up.
And an all-time low for municipal election turnouts. That's very low indeed. We're not talking about a low provincial or federal election. We're talking
20%.
Yeah, that's astonishing to me.
Yeah, well, it is what it is, and I'll lay some blame on the NDP here. They brought in spending caps, they brought in donation caps. They made it very difficult for local politicians to get their message out to the public. I've not received one piece of direct mail. I've had a few brochures dropped in the mail, but nothing that says, Dear Jordan. You have had very few door knockers. I think maybe two. I'm not even sure if they knocked at the door or just left the lit piece. No phone calls from Langley. I've had 7 phone calls from Vancouver candidates, but none from Langley candidates. 7 robocalls, I should note. So yeah, very weird election, and frankly, if it is all-time low turnout or very low turnout, there'll be all sorts of scathing pieces written by well-meaning pundits and columnists chastising the electorate for not getting out to vote. But I'm going to give the electorate a pass on this one because the politicians in charge have made it very difficult to. It's just one of these elections where. They've just made it incredibly difficult to get out there and vote.
Well, and the demographics of voters are changing in this province. And that I think I'm actually a very good example. I live in a condo where it's not necessarily easy for candidates to come in and knock on our door.
Yeah.
There are no landlines in our condo. My wife and I both have cell phones. I have not yet once received a call, and I don't believe my wife has either. Not to speak for her, but I think I would know. And it's aside from mail drops and things like advertising and signs, which we're also not allowed to have in our building. I just don't know how I would suggest to a council or mayoral candidate to reach out and touch a voter like myself. It's not that. The cities we live in are changing, and as more people live in things like condos and high-rise buildings, it's going to get harder and harder and harder. Especially since we've handcuffed them in terms of spending. I mean, they can't just buy ads, or even mail drops can be prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, I know exactly. I, for one, however, will welcome this election because it'll get all of these municipal candidates off of my Facebook, and I can start advertising again without competing with their little ads here and there. Back burner issue. I've got Surrey, you've got Nanaimo. Why don't you go first, since I found your piece on the Nanaimo municipal election fascinating.
Oh, I thank you. I think the average viewer will know that there's a very interesting election happening up in Nanaimo, in that it's the only municipal campaign with a sitting MLA who is fighting to become the mayor of Nanaimo, Leonard Krogh in this case. And with the situation here in Victoria, if he wins and there's a by-election, and should the BC Liberals win the subsequent by-election, there are a lot of ifs here, I know, but it's all very interesting. Anyway, should all those things come to pass, then suddenly we're at a tied legislature here in Victoria. So what this has done is created a situation in Nanaimo where there are people on both sides of the BC Liberal NDP divide who don't know who to support. If you're an NDP supporter, the natural inclination is to support your guy, Leonard Krogh, who's been your MLA since 2005. But if he wins, it might imperil the provincial government, which has a razor-thin margin. The exact same thing is happening over on the BC Liberal side, and in fact, that's what our story was about their longtime friends in BC Liberal circles who are on opposite sides of the campaign, and feeling a little awkward about it. In fact, one of Leonard's campaign workers was the BC Liberal MLA he defeated in 2005, Mike Hunter, which is, I mean, at the very least you can say is this is a unique situation. It's fascinating to watch. The polls I've seen, and there aren't many, suggest that Krogh has a decent lead, but he's not impregnable. And the other candidate, Don Hubbard, is a well-established guy. So it'll be a very interesting situation to watch, not just on Saturday, but in the months ahead.
Yes. Don Hubbard, I can tell you, very well-respected guy. When I came out early on on Twitter and was talking about Leonard Krogh and kind of encouraging him to run, first of all, Nanaimo City Hall is a mess, and whether it's Krogh or Hubbard, at least there's two quality guys who both have the ability to clean up that. You talk about a dumpster fire. Forget ICBC.
I can't believe I even forgot to mention the situation at Nanaimo City Hall. I talked to both Mike Hunter and Jack Doan, who's running Don Hubbard's campaign, and it's funny because both of them obviously want their guy to win, but both of them said, no matter who wins, Krogh or Hubbard, that it's going to be so much better. Yes. Because it'd be hard for a city hall to be more dysfunctional than what's happened in Nanaimo. Both of them made comparisons to Rob Ford in Toronto, and in fact thought that Nanaimo might even be a worse situation. It's just the fact that it's, a very small city on the edge of the country. Otherwise, it would be a national story. And in fact, in times it was anyway. So, I mean, whoever wins in Nanaimo, hopefully, all the other ramifications here in Victoria aside, hopefully the people in Nanaimo can start to have a functioning municipal government again.
Yeah, here. Perfect. So my back burner one is Surrey. I live in Langley, which is of course right next door to Surrey. So we get to enjoy all of the entertaining aspects of Surrey politics without actually having to live in Surrey. It's great. But we have a three-way mayoralty race between two sitting councillors and a former mayor. Tom Gill, the former city councillor, has taken over the Surrey First slate, which currently controls all seats on council. One of his former slate mates, Bruce Hayne, has branched off and created his own slate, taken a couple of Surrey First folks with them. They're running, and then they have a third slate, which is led by Doug McCallum, the mayor that Surrey First defeated back in the day. he was the mayor of Surrey for a big chunk of time in the 90s. He is running a third slate, and they're all going at it tooth and nail. And some talk about people working both sides of the fence. You had Mo Sahota, former NDP MLA, now an NDP lobbyist, I think it's fair to say. He has endorsed Tom Gill. So the NDPers seem to be moving towards Gill, which makes me sort of nervous, makes me wonder what's going on over there. But the polling, generally, we hear from the polling that McCallum's a little bit ahead, and certainly McCallum's mind two important issues. That's SkyTrain instead of light rail, which the general populace seems to want. And he's much tougher on crime vocally than Gill or Haynes. So it will be very interesting to watch that race on Saturday night.
One of many, but that I think more than any other is, you might argue that's the one where you could pick one of three people to win and make a plausible case.
Yeah, it's true. And, I mean, look, the names of their slates are crazy. Like Surrey First, the Safe Surrey Coalition. There's the Integrity Now slate. Like, I mean,
yeah, the Judean People's Front, these kinds of things.
Exactly. It is quite the thing. But you may end up as well with a mayor from one slate and a majority of councillors from the other slate. So the name recognition for these three slates is spread pretty evenly. So that's not really an advantage. The incumbents are spread between two of the three. So Lord only knows what's going to happen. But I can tell you, Diane Watts is out there trying to pull out one last rabbit from her hat for the Surrey First people. But bluntly, it looks like that may not be possible. Diane hasn't been on the greatest streak of late, so.
She's been very quiet since the BC Liberal leadership race. In fact, I'm struggling to think of having heard about her in any context between then and literally right now.
I think she is enjoying her retirement from public life. So,
and fair enough.
That would be good. Any other races we should keep an eye on? We'll talk about Vancouver in a second.
Yeah, there's one. There's two, actually. I mean, I'm going to give a shout out to my own race here in Victoria, which is very interesting. Mayor Lisa Helps is an interesting case of someone who I think is personally popular, but a lot of issues that have rankled. I think even she would admit that have not been well handled, and that the voters of Victoria are upset about. And yet they still seem to like her personally. It's an interesting case. But
I don't. It's like she wouldn't swear an oath to the Queen. It's called Victoria. It's named for the Queen.
It's true.
You get sworn in, swear an oath to the Queen.
As funny as that was, I don't think that's even in the top 5 of things that people are upset about right now here in Victoria. It's a fascinating place.
I'm a royalist. Justin Trudeau, hear me out. I'm a royalist. I'd be a great governor general, just letting you know.
I agree. He'd be fantastic. He'd actually go to some of the events, too.
Oh, I would live tweet them. It would be heck of an entertaining thing. Anyway, sorry, yes, Victoria. What about Richard Atwell in Saanich? Is he going to hold on? Because he was pretty controversial when he first came in.
It's funny. Richard Atwell, if you don't know, in Saanich had maybe the roughest start to any new mayor in the last class, where he and council quite simply did not get along. There was an issue with the city manager, I think, had installed spyware on the mayor's computer so that they can track his keystrokes. I mean, this was just stuff that made your jaw drop. And in the years since then, Atwell has kind of, the news about him has sort of turned mostly positive. He went from being a laughingstock to sort of quietly competent to now the guy that people say, boy, I wish he was the mayor here in Victoria or in a number of other places. The difference between the way that his city hall has handled the roving homeless camp situation here in Greater Victoria and the way it was handled by the city of Victoria is night and day. And to be fair, Saanich had the advantage of watching the mistakes that Victoria made, and that was a significant advantage. But nobody is blaming him, at least publicly, for the situation that Saanich is in right now with his roving homeless camp. Whereas in Victoria, I mean, they had been caught winking at them, I think, too many times, and it was hard to take them seriously when they tried to bring the hammer down. But Mayor Atwell has managed to be both compassionate and firm, which is an incredibly difficult line to walk. I have not heard that he's in any serious danger on Saturday, but I mean, again, with 20-30% turnout, it's all about who comes out to vote.
Yeah. All right. Any other races you're watching?
Yeah, the one in Burnaby,
Yes.
because there was just a poll. I think was it just today that had a fellow by the name of Mike Hurley in the lead. It's not even so much about Mr. Hurley. It's that Derek Corrigan has been the mayor for, you'll correct me, I think 5 terms, and he's an NDP stalwart, and he used to be, well, still is the husband of a former NDP cabinet minister. He's extremely established, and he won the last election with 75% of the vote. I mean, this is astonishing. Man was an institution. And it looks like he may very well lose on Saturday. If you could travel back in time even a year, 2 years ago, and tell people in the Lower Mainland that Gregor Robertson was persona non grata and Derek Corrigan looks like he's going to lose the mayoral election, I mean, you're crazy. There's no way. Gregor he's got a machine behind him with Vision Vancouver, and whatever Derek Corrigan's flaws are, and we can go on about that. But the people of Burnaby gave him 75% of the vote, and that was his. He's a 5-term mayor, so for him to be even behind in the polls is something.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So it'll be interesting. Also, the district labor council has left him. The firefighters are endorsing the other guys. So the machine that Corrigan has relied on all these years seems to have gone over to Hurley as well. So we shall see many times the political death of the Corrigans in general have been prophesied, and never hath it panned out. But it only takes once. It only takes once to come true.
That's absolutely true. And again, whatever you think of Derek Corrigan, I would suggest that 5 terms that's good enough run. Yeah, that's at a certain point, any city hall needs new blood, no matter who we're talking about.
Absolutely, that's plenty. That's plenty. All right, quickly, politicians who are hot and cold. My hot politician right now, Andrew Wilkinson, who I think has played this prop rep debate challenge perfectly. John Horgan looks weak. Looks like he's hiding from Wilkinson. Looks a little bit disingenuous because Horgan came out last week and said he would accept the challenge. He was talking to the Broadcasting Consortium about it. Turns out that wasn't the case. Keith Baldry is the Broadcasting Consortium. He said that the consortium, it's like going consortium, has not been approached. And now we've got the Premier showing up next week. He's going to be at a big rally in Victoria for Prop Rep. With his buddy Andrew Weaver. The two of them are co-hosting it. Funny how he can fit that into a schedule, but he can't fit in a debate against Andrew Wilkinson.
It's funny. Right before question period today, I was here in the press gallery, and I was chatting with Shannon Waters of BC Today, and we were talking about this exact issue, and I was wrong. I said that after yesterday's QP, in which Wilkinson essentially dared Horgan debate me, and Horgan said, no, we're doing it here in the legislature, and that's good enough. That I just didn't see it happening. If he was going to say no at that point, then he's just going to stick to his guns and say no. And then today, Wilkinson asked him essentially the same question, and Horgan said kind of, maybe if we can get a time, then sure, I'll show up, which, I mean, my jaw dropped. I didn't think he'd do it, which... I don't know what's changed, if the fact that he just sort of got caught out with all the things that you just said, including he has time for a rally but not time for a debate. It's not good optics. Or if their internal polling suggests that, it's time to roll the dice. And whether, I don't know how he'll do in a debate against Andrew Wilkinson. He's a seasoned debater, so we'll see. But maybe his team are saying, our side needs this push.
Yeah. Look, it looks bad. Good on Wilkinson. It's hard for opposition leaders to get any kind of press, but this one seems to be helping a little bit. If I were Wilkinson now, though, I would book a hall in every town with a major media outlet. I would show up there every night for the next week and a half with my little podium and a little podium Premier of British Columbia sitting empty, and I would broadcast where I was going to be. I would show up every single night. I'd go to Prince George, I'd go to Victoria, I'd go to Kamloops, I'd go to Kelowna, I'd go to Vancouver, I'd go to Langley, I'd go to Surrey, do it all. Night after night after night, another hall, another debate, and the next no show, Horgan can't be bothered. Pick a night, John Horgan. That's what I would do if I were them.
I mean, even if you set aside your feelings and my feelings, which I think are very broadly similar on proportional representation, I I've heard the argument that a TV debate will do nothing to change anyone's mind, but will raise awareness. To which I say, if that's true, then good, because nobody's talking about this, and they really need to be. And if a TV debate is the thing that's going to sort of crystallize interest and get people looking into it and reading it, then good. That's a public service that both the Premier and Andrew Wilkinson would be performing for the whole province, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree too. So, Andrew Wilkinson, your team, if you're out there listening, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night next week, clear your schedule, book these halls, book the little podium for the Premier, put up the little card.
Cardboard cutout out of them. Yeah, absolutely.
It's what the Teachers Federation does every every provincial election turn when the BC Liberals don't show up for the BCTF debate. They put up the little cards and do the same.
That's true.
Hoisted on your own petard. It's my favorite thing in politics. All right, what do I got? That was my hot. Who's your hot politician right now?
Well, unfortunately, I already scooped myself. I wanted to talk about Mike Hurley, and I did. Any time a relative unknown, at least in a provincial sense, is threatening a 5-term mayor who had won a landslide, I would suggest that man or woman is hot right now.
Yeah, it's true. And your cold is Confidence and Supply Secretariat, I believe. So I think we already touched on them.
Yeah, they can't be colder than having one job and not appearing to do it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I haven't actually looked at the year-end financials to see what they actually cost taxpayers. And certainly next year, there'll be a full year.
I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million. I mean, to be fair, it's not a large organization.
Right.
The point is it has literally one job. And it does not appear to be doing it because they're supposed to be including the Greens in the decision-making process. That patently did not happen this week.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My cold, by the way, is Kennedy Stewart, whose campaign managers run into bullying allegations here. Bullying, not bowling, like a 10-pin. Bullying, either way, although 10-pin in Vancouver might also lose you votes.
Terrible shoes.
He's run into some allegations. The campaign has seemed to stall. He's still leading the polls, but if you look at all the polls, he never grows past that 33% range. Despite having the lead this whole way through, he has not been able to punch through. And, talking to some of my, friends on the left, I do have a couple, they tell me that they're hearing a lot of people rethink their support for Kennedy Stewart and starting to shift over to Shauna Sylvester. That they think that she's done an adequate job distancing herself from Vision Vancouver, of which she was a member of the board of directors for a period of time. So, in fact, I had one well-respected Vancouver election observer who's called many elections correct, many more correct than wrong. He told me that he believes Shauna Sylvester will be the next mayor of Vancouver.
Wow. Well, Kennedy has had such a large lead in polls, but you're right. It's not been a great week for him. And you mentioned Shauna Sylvester. It's funny. I've talked to people in the NPA and places like that, and they always have sort of, sometimes reserved, but praise for Shauna and the fact that she apparently is a good listener. I don't know her well at all. I've never met her, and in fact, I don't know that much about her, but I've been struck by the amount of praise she gets from both sides. So if you're a left-leaning voter in Vancouver and you're upset with some of the things you've seen from Kennedy Stewart's campaign, there's a very obvious place to vote.
Yeah, and further, if you're worried, if you're looking at it and saying the NPA, the center-right split between Wei Young and Ken Sim and Hector Bremner is going to stop any of them from forming government, maybe some of those people jump to Shauna Sylvester in order to stop Kennedy Stewart. So who knows? That's why we have elections.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that path. It'll be interesting to see. All right. Well, anything else going on?
It's another fun week here in Victoria. It's going to be more fun next week. The NDP are so flush with legislative ideas, they tell us, that they've had to extend the sitting hours on Mondays starting this week and then from then on. So have a spare moment of thought for the poor staff that have to be here till 9 p.m. every night. And that's not just political staff. That's grounds crews, security guards, the legislative dining room. Apparently, there's a lot of legislation in front of us, but we haven't seen it all yet.
Will they all get overtime? That is the question.
No.
No, they don't. Oh my gosh. You hear that? Quit voting for these NDPers, Victoria residents. That's how you get out of the house early. God, Christy didn't even have fall sittings. It was great. Yeah, you're there all the time. You deserve it for voting NDP constantly. Anyways, that's see, and here I was worried.
I want to get home safe.
here I was worried I didn't have enough energy to do the podcast.
You were saying you felt a little unenergized compared to last week. There it is.
There it is.
You just had to get fired up. Adrenaline, Jordan. It's the strongest drug there is.
Here's the real question: when's my piece running in the Orca, or did it already run? Do I owe you another piece?
You do. Your piece ran on Monday.
I've got one brewing in my BC Liberal platform series on term limits, but I'll be at BC Liberal Convention. I don't want to run into a bunch of angry term limited MLAs, so I think I might wean her out and hold that till after.
Well, let's just hope they're not watching right now then.
If you're watching, I mean the other MLAs, not you. All right, that's it for us. You can follow, of course, theorca.ca for all your Orca news, on Facebook at theorcabc, on Twitter at theorcabc, and if you want to check out our YouTube channel, easiest way is bit.ly/theorcatv, and you can see all that good stuff there. And follow Maclean K. His Twitter is entertaining. I noticed we didn't mention the big Calgary Stampeder loss last week, but I'm sure it's coming up.
That's me glaring at you into the camera.
We didn't mention marijuana either. Like, look at us.
You know what? I can't believe we didn't mention marijuana. It was a bit of a non-event here in Victoria, except for the party out front. We'll see. I almost feel. I think the highlight of the week was someone cracking up Mike Farnworth by asking, well, in Ontario they're selling cannabis-infused intimate spray. How come we're not getting it here? Which is the kind of thing we have time to worry about these days.
Yep. This is the state of public affairs in Canada. Thank you, Prime Minister Trudeau. All right. From all of us at the Orca, the BC Poly Hot Stove, we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.